Good evening. This is a live report on a test of alliances and energy that began to unfold on March 16, 2026. Tonight, we focus on a single demand that changed many conversations. The President of the United States asked allies to send warships into the Strait of Hormuz. He warned bluntly that countries that refuse could face a worse future for their relationship with the United States and for the alliance that has kept parts of the world at peace for decades. The alliance at the center of this story has been a pillar of transatlantic security for decades. The request put forward was simple in words and complex in effect. Send ships to protect commercial vessels passing through a narrow, vital waterway. Many allies said no. Key partners declined to move their navies into a high-risk area. Several major governments made their position public within hours, refusing the call to send ships into the Strait of Hormuz. Why did leaders refuse? For most of them, the legal case was clear. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the Mutual Defense Clause, does not apply to this conflict. No NATO member had been attacked. That removes the legal trigger that would normally bind allies to military cooperation under the treaty. Leaders also pointed to national law limits, parliamentary approval needs, and a simple fact: these waters are dangerous. Mines and missiles and drones have already hit or damaged merchant ships in recent days. Complicating the demand was the fact that the United States Navy itself has told the commercial shipping industry that it will not escort vessels through the strait because the risk is too high. In short, the U.S. Navy has judged the area too dangerous for routine convoy escorts. That judgment undercuts the president's call. He was asking partners to do what the U.S. Navy judged too risky for itself. That split between rhetoric and military practice widened the diplomatic gap. At the heart of this crisis is oil. The strait moves a large share of world crude and petroleum products. When traffic slows, prices rise. The International Energy Agency has acted. Member nations coordinated the largest release of emergency oil stocks in modern history, and the IEA said it may release more if needed. But the IEA also warned that the release is a temporary measure and cannot fix a long-term closure of the waterway. Those are not abstract numbers. Higher fuel costs hit households and businesses. They push up food prices and freight costs. They squeeze household budgets and force governments to act. Diplomacy is moving in a different direction. India says it negotiated safe passage for some of its tankers. 2 Indian-flagged vessels moved through the strait without a public naval escort, officials said. Those passages show that the route is not closed to everyone. Tehran appears to be selective in how it enforces the blockade, allowing some countries to negotiate safe lanes while blocking others. That reality changes the picture. It suggests the crisis has a political solution if nations are willing to speak directly to Tehran and offer terms that protect shipping without widening the war. More evidence of selective passage came from Pakistan. A Pakistan-bound Aframax tanker, the Karachi, reported a transit through the strait after securing assurances, showing again that negotiated lanes exist, even as much of the region remains closed. Those transits are not a full fix. They are limited and fragile. Each passage is watched and measured. They cost time and diplomacy and sometimes payments or concessions. Shipping is slowing. Hundreds of ships are anchored, waiting for a way through or a decision from their owners. Insurance premiums for vessels moving in and out of the Gulf have surged. Some firms reroute ships around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks and thousands of dollars to voyages. Those extra costs show up in every corner of the global supply chain. Mines are a major hazard. Clearing a lane of mines is slow and dangerous work. It requires specialized ships, helicopters, and careful planning. Even then, the risk remains. Mine clearance in this kind of environment can take weeks or months, not days. The president framed his demand in sharp terms. He said he would remember which allies helped and which did not. He pressed publicly for support and suggested consequences for those who refused. That message landed hard in capitals across Europe and Asia. Domestic politics shape these decisions. Leaders face voters who feel the pain of higher fuel bills. They also face parliaments that must approve military deployments. No leader wants to send sailors into harm's way without clear legal cover and public support. China is watching closely. Beijing imports a huge fraction of its oil through the strait. Yet it has not joined a U.S.-led naval push. Instead, China is balancing energy needs with geopolitical caution. It continues to keep diplomatic channels open and to buy oil from the region when possible. That stance matters. If China refuses a coalition role, the U.S. loses weight in a global push based on allied unity. Rivals can test the seams of Western cohesion and gain advantages in other theaters. This moment is a test of the trust that holds alliances together. NATO's power lies as much in certainty as in tanks and ships. Allies have long expected that when the United States asks, others will answer. That unwritten rule is fraying in this crisis. If partners refuse major security requests, adversaries will take note. That could encourage bolder moves by rivals in other regions from the Black Sea to the South China Sea. The long-term costs of a weakened alliance are not immediate. They are a slow change in how nations calculate risk and who they count on for help. There are human consequences. Crews wait aboard stranded ships, families worry at home, port workers face lost wages, small business owners see supply delays that hit cash flow. Those personal strains are the engine of political response. When enough voters feel the cost, leaders act more quickly. So what will governments do next? Expect more diplomatic outreach to Iran from countries that still have channels. Expect further emergency releases of oil stocks if prices spike again. Expect targeted measures to protect vulnerable households at home. And expect talk of sanctions or financial pressure that stops short of open naval conflict. Those are short-term moves. They can buy breathing room. They do not solve the underlying political standoff over trade, influence, and who controls vital sea lanes. Watch 3 things in the days ahead. 1. Whether any new naval deployments occur and which countries lead them. 2. Whether more tankers win safe passage through talks like those India and Pakistan used. 3. Whether oil prices stabilize or jump again. Those signals will tell us whether the crisis will be contained or whether it widens. This is not a faraway policy debate. It is about money, jobs, food, and fuel in your daily life. A closing of the strait would ripple through the economy and through global politics. That is why the decision of a few governments matters so much. For now, allies said no for clear legal, strategic, and safety reasons. The president said failure to help would be a bad mark on future relations. Markets reacted. Diplomats worked. Some countries moved quietly to protect their own trade lanes. The coming days will show whether diplomacy, economic pressure, or military action shapes the next chapter. NATO was born in 1949. Its simple promise has shaped security in Europe for generations. The alliance exists so small, states can rely on a wider umbrella. The doctrine created a clear deterrent: attack one and all respond. That certainty changed the calculations of rivals for decades. This history matters now. The alliance is not only a set of armies and bases, it is a web of trust. Each leader in NATO must weigh legal obligations, national law, public support, and strategic risk. None of those boxes is simple to tick in the middle of a fast-moving crisis. Let us look at the responses from key capitals. Berlin said plainly that the matter is not a NATO war. German leaders emphasized that NATO's mutual defense clause is not triggered and that Germany will not be drawn into a conflict outside NATO territory. Paris gave a similar tone. French officials said Paris will protect its own interests, but will not let its navy be pulled into a wider war. They framed their stance as defensive and proportionate to national law and national interest. London was cautious. The United Kingdom said it will not be drawn into the wider conflict and stressed it must act within legal and parliamentary limits. British leaders also announced domestic help for families facing higher energy bills. Tokyo faces unique limits. Japan's constitution and laws place strict limits on how its self-defense forces can operate overseas. Japanese leaders pointed to those limits and told lawmakers they would not dispatch escort ships without clear legal authority and parliamentary debate. Canberra said it had not been asked and would not send ships. Australia emphasized regional stability but refused to join a U.S.-led maritime coalition in the Strait. Seoul said it was considering the request carefully, a phrase that in diplomacy often means a leaning toward no. Other NATO and European countries hesitated too. Some offered non-combat help, such as mine-hunting equipment or logistical support, while refusing to place sailors in direct danger. That mix of offers reflects the tight line many governments are walking. Inside Washington, the debate is sharp. Some advisors press for a strong multilateral posture that shows resolve. Others warn that asking partners for assets that the U.S. Navy will not risk itself to provide is unrealistic and potentially damaging to alliances. The president's choice to make the request public and to pair it with a public warning raised the stakes. Diplomatic channels moved from closed talks to open pressure. In some capitals, that pressure hardened positions rather than softened them. A private phone call can yield results. A public ultimatum often does the opposite. There is also a domestic political angle. Leaders worry about being seen as weak on energy or on national security. For some governments, the calculation led to mitigation steps at home. For others, it led to refusal and a search for non-military ways to protect supply. Numbers help explain the urgency. The IEA coordinated a large release of stocks. That move stabilized markets for a time. But if a large portion of daily global oil flows remains blocked, reserves can be used up fast. Analysts estimate that even a big release only buys a few weeks or months of breathing room if the strait stays closed to major cargo flows. The price moves are fast and visible. Traders price in uncertainty. A small change in expected supply can raise the price by double digits overnight. For consumers, that means higher pump prices and more expensive heating and cooking fuel. For businesses, that means rising costs for transport and production. Shipping trackers and maritime groups reported dramatic declines in vessel movements through the strait since early March. In many cases, vessels turned off tracking transponders to avoid detection. That practice complicates counting and adds to the uncertainty around who is where and when. Insurers raised premiums for ships entering the region. Companies face hard choices, risk the shorter route through Hormuz and pay high insurance and danger, or reroute around Africa and add time and cost. Those choices add to freight bills and can change the economics of trade routes overnight. The threats in the water are varied. Iran has used drones, missiles, and naval mines. Mines are especially deadly and slow to clear. A single mine can sink a tanker. Mines can also damage hulls and engines and leave a ship crippled in open water. Clearing them needs specialists and patience. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has publicly warned that it will strike vessels that try to pass without permission. That warning raises the stakes for any navy asked to protect passage. Sailors and commanders know that rules of engagement matter. India's moves highlight a regional shift. New Delhi balanced its energy needs with a cautious diplomatic approach. By talking directly to Tehran and reportedly securing safe corridors for some tankers, India protected some of its own supplies without joining a military effort. That action has ripple effects. When one big importer secures passage through direct talks, others may try similar routes. That could split the group of importers into those who negotiate and those who wait for allied protection. The split changes leverage, and it reshapes which countries influence outcomes in the region. Other major powers watch closely. China benefits from lower immediate costs if it can secure oil. Yet it is also wary of being seen to side directly with one actor in a wider war. Moscow watches for signs of Western weakness. If NATO shows cracks, Russia could press its advantage in its neighborhood. These global calculations are not academic. They shape where weapons move, where diplomats travel, and how markets price risk. The world is interconnected, and a decision in one capital can alter plans in many others. Think about a small bakery that relies on flour shipped from abroad. If shipping costs rise by a few $100s per container, the bakery faces higher input costs. That increases bread prices. A trucker who fills a tanker that rises in price may pass that cost to a store. The web of costs spreads quickly. Families in colder countries depend on heating oil. Sudden price jumps can strain budgets and force governments to step in. Some governments already announced temporary support for households. Those moves ease pain, but cost taxpayers. They are political choices made under pressure. Look at three broad scenarios. Scenario 1, diplomacy works. Talks yield more safe lanes, and markets calm. Prices fall. That path is the least risky for lives, but it requires tough concessions and patient bargaining. Scenario 2, a multinational coalition forms to clear mines and protect shipping. That would be costly and risky and could widen the war. Scenario 3, a long partial closure of the strait causes sustained shortages and a major economic shock. Each scenario has a different price and a different human cost. Many leaders prefer Scenario 1 because it avoids direct combat, but it requires negotiation with an adversary who has shown it will use the strait as leverage. That is a bitter pill for some governments that do not want to reward that pressure. In diplomacy, watch for private envoys and back channels. Some progress often happens off-camera. A minister or a third country may quietly shuttle messages between Tehran and importers. Those quiet talks can produce slow but real results. Watch also for more public moves. A new round of sanctions, announcements of mine clearance plans, or expanded mine countermeasure operations in nearby seas. Those moves change risk calculations and can either calm markets or inflame tensions. The next 72 hours are crucial. Governments must decide whether to calm markets with coordinated steps or to press a harder line. If they move quickly with a mix of diplomacy and targeted economic pressure, the worst immediate shocks can be limited. If they do not, markets and supply chains may face deeper pain. This is a fast-moving story. Small changes can have outsized effects. A single successful tanker's passage can reassure traders. A single additional attack can send prices up sharply. That is why every decision, every phone call, and every statement matters so much. Let us examine Article 5 in plain terms. Article 5 means collective defense when a NATO member is attacked. It was never designed to cover every fight on the planet. In this case, the conflict began in the Middle East and did not trigger Article 5. Allies used that clear legal fact to say they had no automatic obligation to send warships to a strait that is not NATO territory. That legal clarity matters. Leaders cannot lightly put soldiers and sailors into harm's way without a legal basis. Parliaments often demand clear approval. Courts and lawyers will ask whether deployments respect domestic law. Those steps take time, and time was short. Look more closely at Germany. Berlin's message was stark. This is not NATO's war. German officials used plain wording to close the door on a military role in the strait. That answer carried weight. Germany is a major NATO power and a key partner in Europe. Its stance made it harder for other European states to join a US-led naval push. France framed its stance around national interest and legal limits. French officials promised defensive support for French assets, but drew a line on joining a U.S. offensive against Iran. That position underscored France's desire to avoid an open-ended naval campaign and to protect its own legal and political posture. The United Kingdom's approach mixed caution with help at home. London declined to send ships into a wide combat role, but announced support measures for households facing higher energy bills. That action showed how leaders balance security choices with domestic politics. Voters care about bills and bread more than abstract strategy. Leaders respond to that reality. Japan's constraints are legal and political. Tokyo has strict laws that limit the overseas use of force. Any decision to send ships would require legal fixes and likely parliamentary debate. That makes quick military moves difficult for Tokyo, even if political will existed. Australia, which is distant from the Gulf, said it would not send ships and emphasized regional priorities closer to home. South Korea and other partners signaled hesitation and careful study. Diplomacy sometimes uses phrases that mean little in public, but much behind closed doors. Now a closer look at the damage to shipping. Since the start of hostilities, at least 10 commercial vessels have been hit or reported damage in the wider region. That pattern creates fear in the industry. Ship owners avoid the shortest route if costs rise or risks are unacceptable. The cumulative effect is fewer sailings, slower deliveries, and higher prices across the board. Insurance companies have moved rapidly. War risk premiums for Gulf transits rose sharply. Some insurers will not cover ships at all without special clauses. That forces companies to reconsider routes and to add security measures at port. Those costs are ultimately passed to consumers. What would a naval clearance operation look like? First, it would demand specialized mine countermeasure ships. Those vessels sweep and detonate mines or render them safe. Second, air cover, helicopters, and maritime patrol aircraft would be needed to spot incoming threats and to protect clearance teams. Third, escorts would be required for merchant ships, with clear rules of engagement about how to treat suspicious boats and drones. Fourth, logistic chains must be secured to support crews and to supply fuel and spare parts. All of that takes time. It also takes a political coalition willing to accept risk. The presence of mines and drones makes the task dangerous. Nations remember past operations that were costly in lives and treasure. That memory shapes modern caution. Experts in maritime security say that clearing and securing the strait could take weeks to months, even with the right ships and planes. That timeline is why many advocates for diplomatic solutions argue they offer a faster route to relief. But diplomacy requires concessions and guarantees that some governments may find politically hard to accept. Financial markets reacted quickly to news on March 16th. Oil prices climbed and then showed some volatility as rescue efforts kicked in. Traders buy and sell on perceived risk. That rapid trading amplifies headline shocks. For ordinary people, the result is higher pump prices and sticker shock at the checkout. Governments watch those numbers closely because rising energy costs can tip an election or force policy changes. Central banks monitor oil price moves as well. Spikes in energy can increase inflation. Central banks must then consider whether to tighten policy further. That is a difficult and painful choice. Tighter policy can slow the economy and raise unemployment. Loose policy in the face of higher inflation can erode living standards. Neither path is easy for policymakers. Think of a family deciding whether to drive to work. If petrol prices jump, some families cut commuting, others reduce purchases. Small choices across millions of households can slow economic growth. Businesses postpone investments. Job growth can stall. Those are real effects of a disruption that begins on a narrow stretch of sea. Now consider diplomacy. Quiet shuttle diplomacy may be the path that avoids open confrontation. Middle powers and neutral countries often play key roles. Qatar, Oman, Turkey, and other regional players may have channels with Tehran that Western capitals do not. Those countries can act as intermediaries and can help craft temporary arrangements to allow critical shipments to pass. Such back-channel diplomacy is often messy. It involves bargaining, exchange of concessions, and sometimes public silence to protect the talks. But it can work. The recent safe passages for Indian and Pakistani tankers show that such channels can yield results when both sides see a benefit. Some leaders may try to thread the needle, offering limited defensive support while the main diplomatic effort proceeds. That could mean sending mine hunters or surveillance aircraft rather than full combatant ships. It could mean offering logistical help and intelligence sharing. Those options allow friends to help without full combat engagement. Yet even those limited offers can be sensitive. Public opinion can turn against any deployment seen as escalating a war, and opponents can use such moves to criticize leaders for caring more about foreign policy than domestic welfare. That politics constrains choices. In the end, the picture is a mixture of law, politics, and military risk. Each government must balance these elements in public and in private. That is the reason for the cautious responses we saw on March 16th. Each capital chose a path that matched its laws, its politics, and its judgment of military danger. We should also note the human toll in a broader sense. If the crisis expands, aid agencies could see rising needs. Food prices could jump in vulnerable countries. Energy shortages can hit hospitals and schools. Those are consequences that leaders must weigh when they decide whether to risk sailors and ships or to pursue a negotiated solution. Finally, what should citizens expect in the coming days? Expect urgent diplomacy. Expect further talk of reserve releases. Expect some governments to announce support for households. Expect markets to stay nervous. And expect more news about whether any new ships are sent or whether the quiet negotiations that helped India and Pakistan yield more green lanes. To close, this story is about more than ships. It is about trust and choices. Allies said no to a public demand on March 16th. The United States said it would remember. India and Pakistan found routes through negotiation. The IEA acted to cushion markets. None of these steps fully solves the problem. The work ahead will be diplomatic, economic, and, if needed, military in limited roles. What leaders choose now will define not only the coming weeks, but how alliances function in years to come. Our reporting draws on verified coverage from Reuters, the International Energy Agency, the Financial Times, and other outlets with reporting on March 16th.